I'm Shannon Ireland, your host of a Healthy Push podcast. I struggled with anxiety, panic disorder, and agoraphobia for 15 years. Everything used to be hard for me. Even just driving 5 minutes from my house used to feel impossible. But now I absolutely live for travel and adventure, and I experience lots of peace and joy. I've not only reclaimed my life, but I've helped hundreds of others to do the same. Here, we stop managing anxiety and instead we create a healthy relationship with it. One where you say goodbye to the anxious thoughts, symptoms, panic attacks, and fears, and you actually live your life. Forget complicated strategies, quick fixes, or the same old hacks you've heard 100 times before. Each week, I'll bring you simple, actionable advice and honest conversations that lead to real, long-term healing. You aren't just an anxious person, my friend. There are reasons why you're struggling with anxiety, and these are things you can fix and heal from. And this is where that journey begins. Welcome. You're right where you're meant to be. Hello, and welcome back to a Healthy Push podcast. So today I want to talk to you about panic attacks and specifically what the symptoms of a panic attack are and panic disorder. So I really wanted to create this episode because I know how scary and how confusing panic attacks can feel, especially when you don't really understand what's happening in your body. When I was struggling, I remember constantly wondering, what's wrong with me? Is this normal? And I wish somebody had sat me down and explained, like in very simple terms, in human terms, what was going on. Because understanding what's happening in your body and why it's happening can bring so much relief in and of itself. I think so much of what we hear in anxiety recovery and recovering from panic attacks is like all these tips, tools, and hacks. And oftentimes we are forgetting this education and understanding piece, which can help so much. Oftentimes we don't need that fixing. We don't need all the tools. We don't need all the things. We need less doing, more understanding, and more acceptance and allowance. So, in this episode, I want to walk you through the symptoms of panic attacks and panic disorder, what's actually happening in your body when panic hits, and why these symptoms can feel so intense. And my hope is that by the end, you'll feel a whole lot more validated, less alone, and more reassured that what you're experiencing makes complete sense. Because truly, there's nothing wrong with your body. I know how easy it is to convince yourself, like, no, there's something wrong with me. This is not just anxiety. This is not panic attacks. I was there for years and years, so many times. But truly, your body is just doing its best to protect you. And although this might feel terrifying and often does, you're not broken. And there's nothing really big, major going on that's wrong with you. And the more you understand what's happening, the easier it becomes to start healing. So, if you've ever wondered whether what you're feeling is a panic attack, or you've Googled symptoms or gone to a Facebook group or Reddit thread trying to make sense of them, you're not alone. That is so normal, so human, and makes sense. Lots of people will tell me, Shannon, I had no idea what it was. I just thought I was dying, or I thought something really bad was happening. And this is such a common experience, even if it's not your first panic attack. Like, I remember, God, I don't even know. I had thousands of panic attacks, sometimes multiple panic attacks a day. And there were times where I would go down those rabbit holes of like, what is this? What's happening to me? Even though I sort of knew, not sort of, I did know this is panic, right? This is anxiety. But it's so easy to convince yourself it's not that when your brain is going to that place. I have to tell this story because I remember having my first panic attack very vividly. I was at a track meet. I was in high school. I can't remember what grade I was in. I probably was a freshman or a sophomore. And everyone thought that I was having an asthma attack. Like, I had exercise induced asthma at the time. And my coach and everyone thought that I was having an asthma attack. And although it felt kind of similar, I knew this is not asthma. This is something very different, like the feeling of just not being able to catch your breath, kind of hyperventilating, your heart's pounding. I remember feeling so sweaty, so hot, so like disoriented and out of it. And I was like, no, 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 this is not asthma. Like something else is going on. And that was so scary for me because this was the first time I had ever felt that way. And I was like, oh, no, no, this is not good. This is bad. Something really bad is happening to me right now. And a big part of why it was so bad, right, is because I didn't know. I didn't understand. I had no idea what was happening. And everyone was just sort of trying to help me, like, make it go away. And that just honestly ramped things up so much. And then from that day on, I remember being so insanely terrified of that feeling, like having that feeling again. And I remember so many subsequent races, track meets, getting on the bus to go to them, like, it was such torture. So I don't wanna keep going on this tangent, but I really wanna walk you through what panic attacks and panic disorder really are, what the symptoms look like, and what's actually happening, because this understanding leads to a whole ton of relief. So, what is a panic attack? Well, simply put, it's really just a sudden rush of intense adrenaline, intense fear, intense discomfort that usually peaks within minutes. And I think this is one of the most helpful ways to look at a panic attack is really it's just a sudden rush of adrenaline, a sudden rush of that fear. It's not, oh my gosh, there's something really bad happening. It's just, there's a lot of energy running through me right now. And it's really, really not dangerous, although it does feel that way. It does feel really terrifying. It's really just your body's alarm system, that fight or flight response. It's going off when you're not even actually in any danger, but your body, your brain is perceiving something to be dangerous. And along with a panic attack, you can experience so many symptoms. Like I could go on, but I want to list some of the common physical symptoms. You can experience that racing or pounding heart, feeling like your heart is literally going to pound out of your chest. You can feel that shortness of breath, feeling like you can't breathe, maybe it's some of that hyperventilation. You can also feel dizzy and feel faint. You can feel really hot, really sweaty, maybe some trembling, some shaking, even some tingling sensations. And some people say numbness. I definitely got this when panic really ramped up. I could feel it in my hands, my feet, my face. It kind of would go right from the bottom to the top very quickly. You can also experience some chest tightness or some pain, some discomfort there. You can also have nausea or stomach upset. This is also a big one for me. Your brain and your stomach are connected. And so, if you're feeling really anxious, a lot of times for a lot of people, they feel that nausea, which makes so much sense. You can also feel hot flashes or chills or just feeling off. Like you can't even really explain it. It's just like you feel like something isn't right. And one of the hardest parts of these symptoms is that they are very, very real. They're actually happening, right? And the symptoms, when they're present and they're so loud and they're so uncomfortable, can really convince you of a whole lot of things. And it can become very easy to get stuck on the sensations and symptoms. This is really a big part of what keeps panic disorder going. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a few minutes. So, if you've ever thought you were having a heart attack, or you were about to pass out, or you were going to die when you were feeling this panic, this part's going to sound familiar. So, along with those physical symptoms, you can also experience a lot of mental and emotional symptoms, which can be even trickier and even more overwhelming and sometimes more uncomfortable than the others. So, one big one a lot of people will say that they feel, and I felt this, was feeling detached, right? Feeling like you're not where you are, what you're doing, like you just feel kind of removed, kind of like you're just not present, which can feel really scary, really off putting. This is often labeled as depersonalization or derealization. You can also have the fear of losing control, right? Losing all control, things getting so bad or going crazy. You could also have that fear of dying and that intense dread or sense of impending doom. This was one of the hardest things. This would always hit me. And I would always feel this sense of like, something really terrible is going to happen right now. And just that feeling alone, that dread is so heavy. It's so stifling. And also, you can feel this trapped, right? This trapped feeling, this desperation to escape. Like, I got to get away from this. I can't feel this way. I got to get out. And there are so many more mental and emotional symptoms, but these are some of the really big common ones. And these things feel really real in the moment because your brain is just trying so dang hard to make sense of the intense physical sensations. Like it's trying to make sense of what's going on, and so your brain goes to all these places. And when your brain goes to all these places, it can just make everything so much more heightened and so much more scary, especially the more you go along with it. So let's now talk about what is panic disorder. So, panic disorder really develops when the panic attacks become recurrent and you start to have that fear of having another one. This is really what drives panic disorder. And this was true for me. That one panic attack at the track meet, I was instantly terrified of that happening again. And of course, that sort of started me on my journey of having so many panic attacks. When talking about panic disorder, it's so important to talk about that cycle of fear and avoidance because you really do, as a human, just trying to take care of yourself, trying to protect yourself, you start avoiding situations and places or sensations that remind you of panic, like driving, being alone, or feeling your heart racing, right? You try to avoid any of those things from happening, from feeling any of those things, because you're like, I do not want my body to go there ever again. And that makes so much sense, right? That's such an understandable response. But this is a big way that panic disorder continues to hang around is with that cycle of fear and avoidance without that interruption there. So, of course, I have to say this here. Panic disorder is very treatable. You can absolutely fully recover. I am proof of this. So many of my students are proof of this. I know it might feel like this is it. This is going to be me forever. I was convinced of this for years, for a decade or more. Like, I am always going to experience panic attacks. I am never going to be able to just get in a car and go out with friends and do things without having panic attacks. Like, I'm never going to be able to do things without carrying this fear. And it's not true, of course. I've had many, many years, I'm coming up on almost 10 years, a decade of being fully recovered. So, panic disorder is not something that's lifelong, it's not a death sentence. It does, of course, take some work. And a big part of this work starts with understanding and curiosity and compassion. So I'm really glad that you're listening to this episode right now because it will be incredibly helpful. So let's talk about why the symptoms happen. And I never get too sciencey because I don't think it's necessary, but it is important to get into it a little bit. So let's talk about what's actually happening when you have a panic attack because understanding can help to take away some of that fear. So, when you experience a panic attack, what's really happening is that your body's fight or flight system, that built in alarm system, is being triggered. And this system, right, is designed to protect you from real danger. Like we always hear this example if you were being chased by a bear, your body would instantly flood you with adrenaline and other stress hormones to help you either run or fight. And that rush of adrenaline causes a lot of the sensations that you feel. Like your heart really does race to pump blood to your muscles. It changes your breathing and speeds things up to get more oxygen, and your vision sharpens and your digestion slows because your body is trying to prioritize survival over everything else. But the problem is when you have panic disorder, this alarm system is going off when there's not any actual danger, right? There's no bear and your body is just reacting to a false alarm. So I know we can often think like my body is malfunctioning, my body's broken, it's not doing the right thing, but your body is actually doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's just doing it kind of at the wrong time, right? Like we don't need to be doing all this when we're standing in line at the grocery store. And here's the tricky part. When you start to notice the sensations, like your heart pounding or your breathing changing, you might start to panic about the sensations and the symptoms themselves, right? You go internal, you start with the thinking, and you're like, what's happening? Oh my gosh, am I dying? How bad is this going to get? Is this ever going to stop? What if it doesn't stop? What if it doesn't go away? I've been there so many times, and that fear creates even more adrenaline, which then creates more sensations. It really becomes this loop that keeps the panic going. And over time, your brain starts to associate certain sensations and places or situations with danger. Like maybe you had a panic attack in the grocery store, like what I was just saying. So now your brain says, we're not going to that grocery store again, or we're not going to any grocery store again. Or maybe you felt lightheaded or dizzy one day when you were driving. And so you're like, I'm not driving again. That's especially dangerous. Or now you're just constantly checking in like, do I feel lightheaded? Do I feel dizzy? This is called hypervigilance, which is when you're on high alert for the symptoms. And it really keeps your nervous system stuck in that anxious state. And of course, avoidance can keep that cycle going. When you are trying to avoid the sensations, the symptoms, or the situations that have led to some panic and can lead to panic again, your brain never gets the chance to really learn that those things aren't the actual problem. Those things aren't the danger. And it's like you're truly accidentally reinforcing the idea that you need to avoid them to stay safe. But the good news is you can absolutely retrain your brain and your body. This is the work that I did. This is the work that I teach so many of my students to do. And it really pays off because with practice, your nervous system can learn these sensations, these symptoms, even though they're scary, terrifying, uncomfortable, they're safe. And your body doesn't have to hit the panic button at all times, right? When these things pop up. So, this is where the real healing happens when you start responding differently to what your body is doing. So, I want to shift now and talk a little bit about what's helpful because there are so many things that are helpful when you're struggling with panic attacks and panic disorder that we often overlook. So, like I said, one of the big things that is helpful is this education and understanding, not so much doing and trying to fix and solve and get in there with your thinking and do all the things. It's just having this understanding and really knowing like my body is not broken. My body's just doing what it's designed to do. And not continuing to fight up against that is so, so helpful. So, another thing that's really helpful when you're struggling with panic attacks and panic disorder is doing your best to not avoid feeling. And I know this is one of the hardest dang things. This is the biggest reason why I struggled with panic disorder for 15 years because I was out there doing any and all the things, but I was constantly trying not to feel. I was always trying not to feel anxious. I was always trying not to have a panic attack. And that just kept me on that loop, right? I would go places, I would do things, I would constantly be checking in, scanning, seeing how I was feeling, trying to prevent myself from feeling. And it just kept me feeling, feeling, feeling. So, a big part of healing is doing your best to not continue to avoid the feeling. And of course, not continuing to avoid the places and situations that anxiety and panic can pop up in. Another really helpful thing, and we often overlook this one, is supporting yourself in basic, healthy ways. We're often just looking for the solution, the magical fix. We're reading all the books, we're absorbing all the content, all the information, and we're not focused on actually just supporting ourselves in the small, healthy ways. I'm talking movement, eating nourishing foods, drinking more water, prioritizing sleep. Like these things are so incredibly helpful. Another thing that's also really helpful is getting some freaking support. Struggling with panic disorder and panic attacks can be extremely isolating and so freaking hard when you're trying to do it on your own. So I always encourage coaching, support groups, therapy, communities. Like it is incredibly helpful to heal alongside other people. When you have connection and support, it makes things a lot less hard and you heal a lot faster. Okay, and the last thing I'll mention here is acknowledging that recovery doesn't mean never feeling anxious again. Recovery really is about learning to make space for anxiety, really working to create that healthy relationship with it and that healthy relationship with you. This is exactly how I healed. This is all the things that I teach in my Panic to Peace program and my Healthy Push coaching and community is when you put these two things together, when you work to create a healthy relationship with yourself and you work to create a healthy relationship with anxiety, that's where healing happens. But in general, recovery really looks like I am making more space for anxiety. I'm allowing it to be here and to exist as an emotion, and I am learning to just take it with me. And that's where a lot of the healing happens. So you can absolutely learn to respond differently to anxiety and panic. And that's what true healing looks like. I have to go back to when I had that first panic attack at the track meet, years and years. Oh my gosh, it was so long ago. We actually just got our invitation for our 20-year high school reunion. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I that old? But anyway, at that track meet, I wish I had known that it was just adrenaline and it was lots of false protection. And although it felt really scary and really dangerous, it wasn't actually dangerous. My body was just doing what it was designed to do. And there was nothing really wrong with me, and I wasn't going to die. If I had known a lot of this stuff, it definitely wouldn't have led to years and years of me struggling. And another thing I wish I had known was that it made sense that anxiety was popping up. At this time in my life, my parents were getting divorced. I had been through a lot in my childhood. There was so much leading up to the divorce. There was trauma. There was just a lot of volatility in my home and a lot of scariness and unpredictableness. And so it made sense for me that anxiety popped up at this point in my life. And there was also other things in the mix. And so, I always tell my students this, and this is something we talk about in the very beginning of my Panic to Peace program, is we have to take a look at when anxiety popped up and maybe when you had that first panic attack and sort of reflect, did it make sense? Did it make sense for anxiety to pop up? Because oftentimes it does. And although it can feel like it's coming out of the middle of nowhere and there's no real good reason for it, our bodies usually have very good reasons for going to those places and protecting us, even though it's sort of this false protection. So I just want to give you some validation here. If you recognize yourself in what I have shared in this episode, it does not mean that you're broken. It just means you're human and your body is trying to protect you. And you can and you will get out of this false protection mode. Like I said, I'm not only proof of this, hundreds of my students are. And if you're like, okay, Shannon, this has been helpful, but I want more, I do have several podcast episodes on panic attacks. So you can check those out. And also, I have to tell you about my mini course, Overcoming Panic Attacks. In this course, I really teach you how to break free from the panic spiral and how to relieve the symptoms and reclaim control so that you can feel safe in your body again. And truly, truly, what I teach is no more coping. We're not going to continue to throw all the hacks and tools and tips and tricks and all the things at it. We're not going to continue to manage. We are actually going to heal your relationship with anxiety and get off of this fear and avoidance loop. So if you're wanting to heal long term and get your life back, like actually for real, I want you to look at this mini course. In it, there are 10 jam-packed lessons. Like, there is no fluff. I get to the point. I want you to heal, like, practically and not have it take long and not have it be hard. There's also a workbook so that you can turn the lessons into actionable steps toward freedom. And you get lifetime access to this class. So you can go back, listen to it again, and have it as a tool that you can continue to reference when you need it. So I'll put the link to this class in the show notes. And of course, until next time, keep taking healthy action. I hope you loved this episode of A Healthy Push. If you have, I'd be so grateful if you could leave me a rating and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. This helps people to find the show and get the support they need. And if you know someone who could use a little push, be sure to share this episode with them. And for even more support, head over to ahealthypush.com for show notes and loads of tips, tools, and inspiration to help you on your recovery journey. I'll see you next week.